Well, first of all, thanks very much to the System Change comrades for inviting me along tonight and for organising this meeting. It's lovely to see so many people with an interest in this topic, and here and online. But I do feel like I'm entering where angels fear to tread. I've spent many years, as some of you here know, thinking, talking, trying, wondering about this question, basically since the time that I left Mana in 2014 when Kim.com joined Mana. Mana joined with Kim.com. And with some people here have explored this question often enough. And it's important that we keep thinking about it. So thank you very much to the young comrades from System Change for bringing us together this evening. It's certainly a hot topic wherever I go right now. We've been trying things out for a long time, and I know people here are or have been involved in various efforts that I've been part of that haven't quite worked out. And I often think that when we take action and try to organise on the left, what we're doing is rehearsing. We think we're rehearsing, we're practising, we're making attempts to create organisations that will effectively create change. And sometimes those attempts work better than other times, but we do have to keep trying, and we do have to have the bravery to keep trying, while at the same time acknowledging the material reality of what we're in, the context we're in, the resources, lack of resources and things like that. So I'm really just going to try and cover off a bit tonight of some of the questions around this. I haven't come here, as some people online, some people that have communicated with me away from here think, oh, perhaps we're here to launch a party. I'm certainly not, because there's big questions. It's not that I wouldn't like to, but there's some big questions, and we really have to continue to face up to those, as well as doing the practicing and the action and the rehearsing, which is actually the action we need to change this country radically. The main reasons we do need a radical left-wing party in Aotearoa right now is urgency. We know that we're under a blitzkrieg from the three right-wing parties. Every day we're living through it in every aspect of life, affecting so many people, and above all, people who have the least, people with disabilities, people who are unemployed and on benefits, people on low wages, migrant workers. We know this. The urgency that we face is with climate justice, with the attacks on Te Tiriti and on Māori, and right across the board. I'm personally really distressed by the community organisations of all sorts that are losing their money, and the impacts that that's going to have on families, on children, on communities all around this motu, including with those who have least. The other sense of urgency, I think, is the frustration that many of us feel that we have no party, or we have no organisation, we have no place to stand from which we can organise. Some people here are very active in trade unions, some people here are very active in community groups, but that's not the same as a cross-sectoral place where you can come together under a common set of values, principles, purpose, aims and vision to organise together, to build power, to make change right across ecology, human beings, the people who have least, economics, to treaty justice, and in solidarity with places like Palestine, West Papua, and all the other struggles that people here will be involved in. There is, for many of us, no party, and hasn't been for a long time. And there hasn't been. And I guess the other part of that party, beyond economic, ecological and treaty justice, is that a party that's visibly and consciously anti-capitalist and beyond capitalist, that seeks to build a future beyond capitalism and seeks to build a future beyond colonialism, and that seeks to be a true part of the struggle to build a tauiwi as well as Māori response to the challenge of Mātake Mai and constitutional transformation. I've been in a lot of workshops around Te Tiriti, as I'm sure many people here have, and sometimes just by the end of those workshops we can be educated about Te Tiriti, about our history. We can be in a way desperate to mount a tauiwi, as I'm Pākehā, I'm tauiwi, to mount a Pākehā response or a tauiwi across non-Pākehā response to the challenge of Mātaki Mai, but we don't yet have enough forms of organisation that can build the power that would be needed to change our political system in the way that I think Moana Jackson and Veronica Tawhai and others are challenging us to do. So from whatever angle we come from, there is urgency, there is need, but can we meet that need, or are there other avenues than building a radical left party, an eco-socialist, or however one might define it? Are there other avenues open to us? And I guess I'll just touch on a couple of those, particularly in relation to other political parties, because we can't avoid that part of the question. The Labour Party, of course, started off as a proud socialist party once upon a time, but has long abandoned that. I doubt there are many people here that see Labour as a viable option in terms of entering the party and trying to make change from that base, but I would never say no if there were people that wanted to go in that direction. But I've been around too long and seen too many people try and fail inside that party. And since the time of the new Labour Party formation in the late 1980s, I think that's when the left of Labour cut out of it. And really, I failed to see any really left or socialistic people come through in Labour, apart sometimes in Young Labour. But they don't seem to last long enough to make any real difference. We have Te Pāti Māori, of course, which is a Māori-led, Māori-focused party, and kia ora to anyone here from Te Pāti Māori. Continues to struggle, carry on the struggle in Parliament and outside Parliament, and kia ora to everyone involved. But again, for tauiwi, it's not our place to be. So the challenge there is how can we hold our end up as tauiwi, as Pākehā. And then the big one, the Greens. Some of you will have been at the meeting last week that was organised up at Auckland Uni about the Green Party, and questions around that. It was a really interesting meeting. And it's probably the biggest question that we face, because in setting up any left party, if we were to do that, there really is the question, well, look at the Greens, look at their policies, look at their history. They have a long history of standing up for economic and social and ecological and treaty justice. They have now even more left policies in the kind of areas like welfare and employment that I come from that are even stronger than when I was there, and kia ora to the Greens for that. So what's the problem? Chloe Swarbrick talked after the election, when the Greens did so well last year, about mobilising the Greens to take on Labour as potentially becoming an even bigger party than the Labour Party. It sounded good, but what's happened to the Greens since then, I think we can all see a fairly, some of it's way beyond the tragedy of the loss of Efisa Collins, way beyond anyone's imagination, a terrible tragedy and a terrible loss to this country and to the party. But aside from the visible problems with the Greens, I think there's some underlying ones as well. I left the party when I left Parliament in 2009 because I felt that it was going too far to the right at that stage. It was becoming, the caucus continually talked about the potential of going into coalition or into some kind of arrangement with National. That was on the table for years. And I just thought, if this party is serious about entering a relationship with National, if it's serious about saying emissions trading schemes are the solution to the climate crisis, all we're doing is greening capitalism. And the leadership later of James Shaw, of course, accentuated that. And I've seen wave after wave of really fantastic young people, mainly, into the Green Party in the hope of changing it, of bringing it back to the left, where from my point of view, it came from quite a left place when I was there back in the day. And that's another story. But I don't think it's got back there. It's still very much a party of highly educated people, of small business people, organic farmers, really quite middle class, and quite focused on issues that are not resonating with people who are in low-wage jobs, in ordinary jobs, or unemployed on benefits, people struggling to survive every day in our communities around the country. The culture of the Greens, I think, is one of the hugest impediments to it becoming a party for the working class. And I've spent years in that culture, and it was very difficult. I'm a white middle class person, I'm the first to admit it, but I found it hard, really tough, and for all sorts of reasons that perhaps I won't talk about here, but if anyone's been in the Greens, you'll know what I'm talking about. For example, the food fights and conferences that are vegan. And I knew people that were bringing food parcels in. Just a small example. But another problem alongside that is that the use internally in the Greens of theoretically participatory politics, of democratic politics, of consensus, which all sounds good, but are actually used in ways that are extremely autocratic and top-down and ruled from the top. It was happened when I was there, and as far as I can tell from outside, it's often continued. And so there's this lip service to participatory democracy, but in fact consensus used as a form of autocracy, and quite hard for people to come in from the outside and make change, as so many of my left friends have tried to do. So that's enough about the Greens for now. At the same time, the intentions are good. There's some great MPs. If anything was ever to happen from what I'll loosely call the eco-socialistic left at this point, I think that we would need to work with the Greens and be allies to them. But a key thing would be how, and a key thing for us to think about in these conversations, actually what is the difference between people like us and what our aspirations politically might be? What is the difference between what we might try to do and what the Greens are already doing? And we know that some of the Green MPs we'd probably see them as us. So there would be no point in setting something up that wasn't offering something quite different than the Greens, but I think it would also need to be in friendship or alliance with the Greens and very likely with Te Pāti Māori as well. The challenges we face are real, and we can't afford to have magical thinking. Many of us are quite capable of writing and speaking beautifully about a vision for a future, beautiful policies. There's plenty of that around, but we have to in forming organisation, we have to be realistic about what is possible. A few of the key questions that we face, firstly, numbers. If we were to try and set something up, how fast would we be able to bring people together, enough people to make it visibly an option to form a true political party of the left? I think that you'd probably need to start with visibly, literally hundreds of people, at least 300 or 400, right from very early on, to make it visible that it's not just some small, struggling left sect, as so many of us have been involved in the past or currently. Not that there's anything wrong with that, with the small, tight organisational form, but to set up a political party that can involve ordinary people in every way and active on the streets and with the ability to vote. That's a big job. And without visible numbers who are generally committed, I don't think it would go anywhere. Is there a strong enough hunger for change? Are there enough people that are around us in the worlds that we move in to make that happen? And we'd have to move quite quickly to have credibility and visibility. And for those that are on the other side of left and say that really we should be working for revolution and not reform, I don't think that we're in revolutionary times, and it can be a mistake to act as if we are, no matter how much at times one yearns for that. There's the old reform and revolution debate. Again, I won't go into that now, but I do think that I hope that peaceful change to beyond capitalism would be a good thing. Peaceful change to constitutional transformation and a true honouring of Māori as the tangata whenua and tino rangatiratanga. A peaceful transition to that would be a great thing. The second big problem past numbers and are there enough of us to make this happen is money. And we don't like talking about that too much, but we can't avoid material reality. I don't think that a small group of keen activists with little or no money, even with really good social media skills and other kinds of organisational skills, can build a mass organisation successfully. I lived through the mana experiences, I'm sure some people here did as well, and even then with mana, even though we had Hone Harawira with all his parliamentary salary and resources, which is a lot compared to what you have when you've got nothing, that party got sucked in, I reckon, to going with Kim.com on the promise of $3 million, and that's a trap. And when you're struggling for every penny, when you can't resource meetings like this, even the cost of this meeting tonight, can you imagine having to organise lots of these meetings? Can you imagine organising national hui where hundreds and hundreds of people come? Can you imagine needing to get your leading spokespeople around the country to mobilise people in other parts of Aotearoa? I mean, people want this everywhere. I know they do, because in my travels, I hear people calling for this, what we're talking about tonight. But we won't catch those people unless we can move around and collect and work with people and inspire and bring them with us, and all that costs money. The infrastructure of a party, we need those social media experts, you need the website builders, you need the fundraising, you need the people that hold an organisation together, and that costs. So where does the money come from? That's the second big question I've got. The third question is around scale and scope, and sometimes, and I know I've got friends here that have tried doing this with me, you try to start small and build slowly, and you try to get everything perfect. And we can have great purity when we're left activists, a purity about every issue, about all the different politics of all the issues and sectors that we're involved in. We don't want to get anything wrong. But there's real dangers in starting off and trying to get everything pure and perfect from day one. You can take years trying to achieve that purity, and in the meanwhile, nothing is really happening. Nothing is changing. So how do we move through that in a way that doesn't undermine the values that we share, but also is capable of opening up quite quickly beyond that with clarity, not undermining kaupapa, but at the same time not holding ourselves back by that drive for purity. Which means you need a clear vision and kaupapa right from the start. We need a party to be successful. We need multiple strong voices. I'm really wary of it's usually a one-man band, the Jim Anderton or Hone Harawira model. And it could be, it's not the kind. I think questions around what leadership could or should look like are really important. Shared leadership, diversity in leadership, acknowledging that we lead, different ones of us lead in different ways, allowing for multiple strong voices and multiple leadership, not focused just on one or two key people. Again, that's something I think any organisation would need to aspire to if it was going to work. So, a few more ideas of what I think. Am I running out of time here, Evelyn? Yes. So I thought that would happen. You should have been telling me. Just a few last ideas about what I think we need to make it work. If we were to go ahead, and I'm at some point, and it's still a totally open question. We would need a unifying idea and a unifying organisation. So something that really holds, something very inspiring that holds us, a broader us, together. I think we need to be willing to be part of a plurality of organisations, with trade unions, with movements, with groups in the community, with other parties of the left, aiming for non-sectarianism to the maximum extent possible, which, as we know, is very difficult on the left. I think it would be great to have a party which was a place for ngā iwi, tātou katoa, so clearly not a Māori-led, Māori-focused party, but a party where Māori, Pasifika, migrant peoples, people of all our diversities could be together, be welcome, to have a place to stand. A culture of listening and respecting each other, and not that old, sometimes parts of the left have had that culture of it has to be correct, I'm the only one that's correct, or my little group's the only one that's correct. Of moving past that and maximising respect for each other and inclusion across. I think leadership has to be talked about and accountable, known, and not invisible and holding power in quiet ways rather than out in the open. We need the courage to talk openly about capitalism and about colonisation and about power and the nature of power. And to be aware that lots of people in this country, lots of ordinary working people and unemployed people and beneficiaries and their families don't actually understand politics and economics, in some cases at all. That was one of my biggest learnings from mana, that many people in mana totally supported the party, the movement, but their understanding of how anything works was very low. And I think to be effective, people can't make change unless they understand what's going on and what they're facing and how politics works. What is Parliament? What is a political party? What is socialism? What is capitalism? What is colonisation? Unless people have some idea about those things, their power to change the world they're in is low. So there's a role for conscientisation and education there. The language used, not talking in language and languages that people understand, not academic language or not high theory Marxist language, but in language of the streets, which any union and other organisers here will know about. As I said before, not getting caught up in perfection and purity while holding kaupapa, respectful relationships, recognition of reality. It's up to a lot of us, not just a few of us, to make any decisions or thinking about this, but I really welcome the discussion. Kia ora.
Could I? I'm just checking people on Zoom can hear me in this position. Can you just check people on Zoom can hear? Because sorry, we were having a bit of trouble with the Zoom audio, but I think we got it fixed. Is it working? Yep. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Evelyn, for introducing. Thank you so much, Sue, for sharing your wisdom with us on this crucial issue. And so I was at a workshop with Sue when I pitched this meeting to her, and she suggested I should speak as well, as she could tell how passionate I was on the subject. So now you get to have veteran Sue Bradford followed by wide-eyed young optimist me. But I did want to share some of that kind of optimism of the will as it is. I know how great the challenges are, how big the barriers are to overcome for such a thing to work, but I'd like to make a bit of a case as to why it's necessary and under the right circumstances possible. And the situation is urgent. As Evelyn said in the introduction, we've got this horrible government. I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone here how racist the government is. Luxon said in Parliament today he believes that Māori ceded sovereignty. Fake news from Mr. Luxon there. Their austerity agenda is really going to ruin a lot of people's lives. Beneficiaries, disabled people, public servants, Māori and Pacifica communities. A lot of things are on the line there with the government. The climate crisis, I know we've got some climate activists here as well, and System Change was established to be climate-focused. They're not exclusively climate-focused organisation. It's so desperately urgent. Greta Thunberg has autism, so do I, and Naomi Klein wrote about how she believes that autistic people find it more difficult to hold cognitive dissonance, and that might be why Greta struggles to have the dissonance of everyone's going about their lives as if everything is fine, and yet we've got this climate crisis that is an existential threat. I don't know if I have the same level as Greta, but it's definitely always in the back of my mind. We've not got many years left to fight the climate crisis. It's kind of terrifying. And that's a huge kind of underlying thing in my politics. Radical change is necessary, and we don't have time to patiently build over decades. It has to happen pretty soon. Are we up to that challenge? I guess we're going to find out in the next couple of decades, aren't we? The forces we're up against are huge. The system is designed to funnel profit to the top 1%, and we're seeing the outcomes of that for people and planet. The system is designed to constantly expand. That means overcoming planetary boundaries. That means colonizing across the world. That's why Aotearoa was colonized. That's why Palestine and West Papua are going through that violent process right now, and it's critical that any left here stands with tangata whenua, stands with Palestine, stands with West Papua, every other struggle, the Kanake people as well in New Caledonia. I think the climate crisis hangs as a shadow over us, and so does Rogernomics. The great reforms of the 1980s moves this country radically to the right, and it hasn't changed since. I was listening to the Juggernaut podcast that Toby Manhire did on the spin-off recently. It was fascinating. Roger Douglas talks about moving in quantum leaps. I thought about opening with a quote from Roger Douglas. I thought maybe that would go down like a cup of cold sick, but he talks about advancing in quantum leaps, and you move so quickly that your opponents are confused. I think this government is employing that exact strategy right now. They are moving as quickly as they can so that when a social movement has formed up around one issue, it's already too late. They've moved on to something else. And the right is very effective at this. But on the other hand, the Labour Party moves things incrementally, a tiny bit in a progressive direction, generally. Not always, sometimes they move it in the wrong direction incrementally. But, you know, I would say generally the Clark government and the Ardern-Hipkins government moves things a little bit forward. If you have a situation where right-wing governments keep move things radically to the right and left-wing or Labour governments move things an inch to the left, then overall things have moved radically to the right, and I think that is, in a nutshell, what's happened in the last 40 years. And I don't think Labour's track record shows that if they do win power at the next election or 2029 or whenever, they will undo these radical reforms that the government is doing right now. Typically, they have moved things less to the left than the previous government has moved things to the right. So I think that's a big concern. Will the next government even undo the horror show that's going on right now? Now, I believe that people who are inside the Labour Party trying to turn it to the left have a big challenge. I don't know if it's impossible, but you know, I also think it's fairly unlikely. I wrote an essay about this, which some of you may have read. I think there's huge barriers that mean that the things that happened in the UK where Jeremy Corbyn took over the Labour Party and turned it radically to the left there are very unlikely to happen here because the leadership rules are not one member, one vote like they were in the UK Labour Party, and also there's not this hard left principled socialist faction in the New Zealand Labour Party that there is in the UK. So I don't think there's much hope in that alternative, but I do still sincerely wish very well for the people who are trying to work towards that. Greens into Party Māori are a different story. They do want genuine change on poverty, genuine change on the climate, and of course both parties want Te Tiriti o Waitangi to be honoured and Tēnā Rangatiratanga and Mana Motuhake to be upheld, as any progressive party must. I, however, still don't think either of these parties are anti-capitalist, and as Sue said, I think we need something anti-capitalist because the forces we're up against are great. The capitalist system enriches a small number of people who have a lot of wealth and a lot of power, and they are not going to give up that wealth and power without a fight. I don't think the Green Party is a fighting organisation. I was the Young Greens co-convener a few years ago now. I think it's a kind of a bit of a everyone can all be friends organisation, and including within the party, the left and the right of the party. Why are you trying to divide things by having a left-wing faction was what some of us in the room have been accused of. Interesting. Yes, I was trying to divide things because, James Shaw is not a friend of the environmental movement. He completely sold out the environmental movement in my eyes. The Zero Carbon Act was called toothless by Russell Norman, James Shaw's predecessor, and one of the people who was maybe shifting the Greens a bit more to the centre in the 2000s, but even so, he was horrified by what James was doing and clearly still wanted something a lot more left-wing. And I think the Greens' ultimate strategy is to be a junior partner to the Labour Party. That's I think that's the end point of their goal. They're not a working class party, they're a party of the middle class. Like Sue, I think I'm pretty middle class myself, so I did feel at home there in some ways, but politically I didn't, because we can all be friends. This is just like a technical issue that we can fix. That's not the mentality to win the struggle against the most wealthy and powerful people in Aotearoa and in the world. And the climate crisis is too urgent to rely on that. I'm much less of an expert on Te Pāti Māori, but I do know that as much as they've been doing some great work recently, they do still identify as a neither left nor right party. And I still do think that obscures the class divide to some extent. Their policies will clearly benefit Māori workers and reduce poverty, and that's great, but it's still not an anti-capitalist party, and I believe an anti-capitalist party and a clearly left-wing party is necessary. That's not to say that anti-capitalists can't work with the Greens and Te Pāti Māori on a lot of things, and even Labour in some cases. I know that suddenly now they're in opposition, they've been asking to speak at our rallies, so good on them, I suppose. And they are welcome to speak against this government's horrible cuts and everything. So I don't think we should be sectarian, but we also shouldn't be afraid to criticise Labour for being so hopelessly inadequate. Organisational independence for the radical left is really key, in my opinion. I was a huge supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm half English and I was born there, and I have lived here most of my life, but I was watching very excitedly as Corbyn in the UK was campaigning for a transformative left-wing government that would have been very meaningful in that country. But he was constantly sabotaged by his own right-wing MPs within his party, to the point that they managed to stop him winning the 2017 election despite the fact that his policies were hugely popular, and then once he had lost in 2019 because of Brexit, they purged him from the party. Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, a lot of people will be familiar with his campaign to move things to the left. He didn't even get to the actual general election before he was stopped by the centrist wing of that party. And we don't actually have to look overseas for an example of this. In 2017, when I was in the Greens, Materia Ture took a hugely brave stand on ending poverty and telling people that the welfare system is designed to keep people trapped in poverty, and therefore she had to lie in the 1990s to wins to survive. She told people that. The Greens polling actually went up after that, and then she was sabotaged by two right-wing MPs, Kennedy Graham and David Clendon, who resigned in order to bring her down. And they successfully did bring her down and nearly got the Greens kicked out of Parliament in that election by doing that. Any kind of party, in my opinion, where the radical left is trying to appease a centrist, incrementalist faction that is not against the system, that party will be torn apart by these people, in my experience from what I've seen, because they are so committed to the system that they would rather Corbyn lost or Materia lost or Bernie Sanders lost than the party as a whole won, because they don't want radical change. They're invested in the system. That's why we need an independent anti-capitalist organisation, in my opinion. In France, the French left made a big advance in the recent election. Everyone was expecting the fascists to win. it was terrifying. You know, people talk about Trump being a fascist, and I think there is huge fascist elements there, but in France it's an openly neo-fascist party with direct ties to a fascist government, unambiguous, and people thought they were going to win, and they lost because the radical left managed to lead a coalition of the left-wing parties on a radical platform, and they actually took a shock first place in that election. They forced the equivalent of Labour and the Greens there, as well as the Communist Party, which is a weirdly centre-left party, given it's called communist. The radical left party forced them to adopt their policies because they were so much more popular with workers. But because they had an independent organisation, they weren't vulnerable to being expelled and sabotaged from within. Whereas what Corbyn and Sanders tried to do, their organisation collapsed once they were no longer in running for president or running for prime minister and leader. It creates a really fragile situation. So I wish people well who are trying to move centre-left parties to the left, but I think it is absolutely critically important that we have an independent left-wing party. Not just a parliamentary party. I have focused on electoral politics, which is my area of expertise and most knowledge, but such a party would also mean a place for social movements and activists to gather and put together a shared vision of what radical change looks like. How do we get Matiki Mai implemented? How do we roll back neoliberalism? How do we roll back capitalism? How do we take on the power of the most powerful people in the world? We need a vision on all of those things, and we need a united organisation to do that, in my opinion. Can it happen? Well, I don't have experience of that. Sue does. There are huge barriers, as she talked about. But in the European context and in America, there were decades where the radical left was kind of fringe, outsiders. Everyone thought they were dead and irrelevant forever. And then suddenly an austerity government came in during a recession, attacked the working class, people fought back, the radical left were fighting back, the incrementalist left were not offering anything, and things changed. Could that happen here? I believe it could. We need to be ready for if that does happen. Does that mean launching a party today? No. But does that mean we start talking about it? That's the purpose of this meeting, simply to start talking about it. I think we can and we must. So thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, awesome. So what we'll do is we'll probably go back and forth, do like 2 questions from the audience, 1 question from Zoom. If you want to ask questions of either of our panelists, or if you'd just like to make comments, prompt a question for discussion, we're open to anything.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Tatiana toku ingoa. My name is Tatiana. I'm an organiser for the PSA, Te Pūkenga Here Tikanga Mahi. I probably should and am somewhat obliged to mention that these are my personal opinions and do not reflect the views of the PSA. I have, I guess, a comment and then a couple of questions that have come up on my reflections on a radical left party in Aotearoa. For a long time, I was one of those people who was like revolution or nothing. I kind of thought, Fidel and Che got like 60 dudes together and then like 12 of them made it to Cuba and then they had a revolution, so surely we could do that here. We're an island nation, right? Shoot some people, bada bing, bada boom, you've got a Socialist Republic of Aotearoa. And I think in my heart I'm always going to believe in the Socialist Republic of Aotearoa. But something's happened to, I guess, bring me here tonight. For those of you who are in CTU affiliated unions, you may be aware that they're running a program called Reimagining Aotearoa Together. And I've seen some of the comrades here tonight at those hui, which I think has been fantastic. I have seen a significant shift in the mindset of our union members in Aotearoa in the last year. I see delegates who have gone from not really knowing what the difference is between Labour and National and what's the left and what's the right, to asking really genuine questions. Why isn't tax reform happening? And you kind of had the conversation with them and they reached the conclusion that the people who are in power right now, i.e. the rich, don't want to give up that power. So that's why they're not going to take tax cuts, and they're going to lobby against them. And they have more resource, as has been mentioned by our speakers. But it's really clear, I think there's a really clear mandate from workers in Aotearoa that a radical left party is needed. They're talking about things like right to strike and universal basic income and housing security and all of the same things that I've been talking about really since I was like 10 years old in the Uruwera. But there are more and more people talking about it now, and they're talking about it really clearly. And there's one thing that's come through at every single one of the hui that I've been to. This stage it's been about 10. The real question that people have is, why would we ever trust Labour again? We've trusted Labour before. We've trusted the Greens before. We've trusted Te Pāti Māori before. Why would we ever do that again? So from my kind of work experience in the unions, I think the mandate is clear. I think the need is clear. I think there is an urgency to it because we are on a slow slide into fascism, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. But my reflections lead me to two questions. I personally have opinions and views on them. I'd be really curious what the speakers think of them. The questions are, why would we not use existing structures such as unions and the CTU that are an existing stable governing body for workers? The second question being, if we couldn't reliably get a seat in government, what's the point of having a party? And those are questions coming from both members and from my comrades who are organisers and from comrades in the community activist scene. So, kia ora.
Kia ora. Great to hear that. Thanks for that. On the question of the unions and the CTU, of course, they're there for all involved to use to the maximum extent possible. And I'm really heartened by things like the fact that we had our first May Day rally and march this year in Auckland that we've had, first one we've had for ages, and organised mainly by First and Unite. But I know PSA spoke as well. And it was good to get workers out on the street again, and the beginning to mobilise on the street as well as through the other processes of the CTU and the unions is great. And of course anything that can be done to build union power is critical, but it's different than having a party that crosses everybody. My background's in the unemployed workers movement and spending years on the outside grappling with the CTU and the unions to say unemployed workers and beneficiaries, we're workers, women looking at raising children, we're workers too. So it's something that goes further. On the second question, if you can't get a seat in power, a seat in Parliament, what's the point? There's a huge point in that you have to start somewhere. So if you think, for those that know their history, back to the beginnings of the Labour Party, way back in the radical union, the union movement of the 1900s here, they had no hope. They were in prison, they were on the streets. It took them decades to build a party that got them where they got into power. I don't think it would take anything like that long, nor do we have that sort of time. But you just have to have a little bit of patience and faith and courage in what you're doing. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Sue. I also think one element is that Māori voters have a history of voting strategically. If the party had a strong, very strong kaupapa on tēnā rangatiratanga and mana motuhake, and Māori voters believed in that, there's a chance we could get in without getting 5%. A lot harder to win a general electorate seat, but I suppose it would be much more up to Māori on the radical left to determine whether or not that was possible, because I wouldn't know myself, but that would be one way, and that is how Mana managed to get in and stay in 2011 and almost stay in 2014, but not quite, and not quite's not good enough. On the question of why wouldn't we use the existing structures, pretty much what Sue said. In the essay that Barty mentioned that I haven't made public yet, but on why I believe a party is necessary, I say that unions are the shield of the working class, and we don't just need a shield, we need a sword. You know, unions are about defending workers, but that defensive struggle can sometimes be limiting, and it's important that unions do prioritise the defensive struggle over going on the attack against capitalism. We don't want to get loads of people fired for a hopeless cause. So a political party is a crucial second element of that, in my opinion, and that's why we can't just go through the CTU. Also, beneficiaries, unemployed people, people doing domestic labour who aren't in the world of work as recognised by capitalism, those people need a voice as well. Okay, shall we get another question?
Kia ora. Is it Tatiana? Yeah. I was at the Reimagining kōrero with Tatiana and stuff, and I kind of agree with her point there. There was a lot of really good kōrero, right? And there's some very smart people who are, workers and delegates that are organising people in that space. Something Sue mentioned, which was the lack of, I don't know how to kind of frame this, the lack of that really nitty-gritty political language, especially in politics. And I guess if you're going to offer an alternative to what we've got, it would be great. And honestly, I get frustrated myself that people aren't talking about neoliberalism and talking about capitalism, because they're all too scared to. Well, apart from probably Te Pāti Māori, maybe. There seems to be a real reluctance to talk about those sort of things. I agree, I'm not too sure how to frame the question in here, but you're also talking about power and structures and stuff, and I definitely agree that unions, workers, if it's going to be a party about anti-capitalist stuff, it has to be centred in workers, right? It would be great as a worker myself to see workers in amongst those talking about those things like capitalism and neoliberalism in the media and helping. Because I think, Sue, you mentioned that perhaps people didn't understand those things. I think people do. The reality for people is they do understand the nature of oppression and the nature of being oppressed and losing out in the society and realising that they're in part victims because they're doing the hard yakka. There's people down the street in offices having their coffees and lattes and stuff, and we're here slugging it out. All those ideas, they're not talked about in those neoliberal capitalist aspects within the union kōrero, but I think once you break down neoliberalism and capitalism, it's actually really understandable to workers because they know those things. That's their everyday reality. So I'd love to see that in some form, whether it's in a political party or whatever, or just through a massive union movement. There seems to be a bit more overseas, more people talking about those things than in Aotearoa. I don't know how to... what are your thoughts on that? And how do you see that? Do you share that frustration? How do you see your vision of whether it's a political party or a movement, adding that into it and helping people to, like the kohanga reo generation, they're rising up with that knowledge. Wouldn't it be great to have a generation of people rising up with anti-capitalist fluency? Yeah, the language, the understanding of it all. And I think it's there more than you realise. Definitely, because I work with a lot of people and they understand shit. There's a lot of smart workers who never get anywhere because they're not driven by power and money and aspirations like that. They're just driven by family and connections and all those other things. But they're really bloody smart people. We just need to empower them,
I think we might just take one question from the Zoom and then we'll go back to some more questions from the floor. Okay, so we'll quickly do one question. This is from Helene on Zoom. What is the most hopeful aspect of the challenge we face to build a party? How are proper funds raised? On
the most hopeful aspect that Helene mentioned, I think that's really important that we have hope and that we give people hope. And I think, for me, like, what's happened over just when I was talking about hope, that's not very inspiring. There is huge hope in people suddenly realizing that there's so many more of us than we thought. Overseas, people like Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, so many other cases, people thought that radical left ideas were really unpopular, and then suddenly and dramatically people realized that this is hugely popular. And I think that could happen here, because our ideas, as Jason said, are pretty simple. We want the power to be with the people, with working class, with tangata whenua, in a co-governance way, as Matiki Mai outlined, not in the neoliberal co-governance method, but real kawanatanga sphere, rangatiratanga sphere, as Matiki Mai outlined. These ideas could be hugely popular if people just knew that there's so many more of us than we thought. But when we're all in our little silos, or we're all fighting one thing at a time and we're not getting enough people to our protest, or we're just at home scrolling the internet, seeing that Luxon said that Māori ceded sovereignty, being frustrated, being furious, we don't realise. And getting people in the same room is a start. And so I'm glad. I take hope from how many people came here tonight. I have no idea about money, sorry, so I might have to leave that one to Sue. Sorry, Sue.
Cheers, Elliot. To the question of worker power, worker knowledge, worker understanding, kia ora, is it Jason? Agree with everything you say. The knowledge lies with the people who experience oppression in the situations at work or out of work or in the household. I spent many years working with unemployed people and beneficiaries, and know the knowledge comes from the people. They understand and know the situation they're in, but that does not necessarily translate into understanding how our political and economic system works, or how capitalism works. So it's that conscientisation and understanding and working to share that knowledge in ways that doesn't patronise or put down people, but works to help them understand, which I'm sure you already do by the sound of it. And not in a way that puts people down, but that acknowledges their own experience, and that comes from their lives and their intelligence and their strength and everything else that working people bring to the struggle and to fighting for a better future. So it's just, from me, I guess what shocked me in Mana, really, it was the first time I'd ever, and I've been around too long now, but it's the first time I'd ever been in a party that was seriously and genuinely majority working class, big time, more or less completely, and more or less completely tangata whenua, apart from a few of us odd tauiwi, and that I was working at branch level as well as at national level, and at branch level really coming to grips with the fact that a lot of people did not understand anything about how our political system works. They did not know what an MP is, or what a part, like those things that some of us would just take for granted. So I thought that Mana could have done much more in terms of helping to educate and work with people, because with that knowledge comes the power to change. On the second question from Helene, kia ora Helene, out there in the ether, in Ponaki, I agree with what Elliot said, but I'd also say one of the things that gives me hope about the possibility here of an independent left party is that at the next election, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to absolutely hate the coalition parties and what they've done. Heaps. There's also going to be a huge number of people who are very distrustful of Labour and the Greens because of history. So it feels like an opportune time, if we're ever going to do it in the nearer future, an opportune time to start thinking about it now. On the question of money, I do not have answers. It's why I raise it. The only answers I can think of is that if we were seriously doing it, we would have to really think about where money is in places that we know about. Not looking to unions or to other sites of struggle who need every penny they've got. not bludging off our comrades, not looking to other organisations that are struggling, but thinking where are the people and places we know that might support this that have more money than I do, or we do. Though, of course, I also know from my background that it's the poorest people who in their own way contribute the most. Kia ora.
Another solution is to just ask Kim.com again. I think he's been deported, so we can't.
Hello. I showed up late, but I listened to the whole thing via Zoom, so I'm not just randomly showing up and asking a question. I'll keep this brief, though. 2 quick questions. Number 1, to what extent do you think such a party would act as more than just a pressure group on Greens and Labour? And second question, how would this political party raise the limitations of working with the state?
Easy questions. Second part of that, working with the state. I am very much sympathetic to revolutionary socialism. I've been in a Trotskyist group before. I believe that the ideal situation is that the workers rise up and overthrow the system in time to stop the climate crisis. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. It doesn't, as Sue said, we shouldn't act like we're in revolutionary times when we're not. That doesn't mean we don't aim for it. In terms of reforms, when I read Rosa Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution for the first time, I was interested that it's a lot more nuanced than a lot of Trotskyists and others will portray it. I had the impression from talking to others that it was simply that you couldn't reform capitalism at all, and there's no chance of that, and therefore you have to only work towards revolution. And once that made no sense to me, because we need to be aware that 40 years ago, in terms of the economy, things were a lot more equal. Unemployment, I think, until 1978, never went above 1.5% from the war until the 70s. Poverty was lower, inequality was lower, tax on the rich were higher. That is possible. The question of reform or revolution, to me, more comes down to a question of agency. Do you rely on people from above, and this would apply to a radical left party, to hand down those reforms, or do you rely on the power of the workers to fight for them? Because it's actually about, are you fighting for reform, or do you believe, as the people Rosa Luxemburg was arguing against, that the system will naturally turn into socialism? We know that's not true. We've seen that's not true. So there is a struggle, and to me, a revolutionary party or a radical left party that's serious will seek to appeal to people in the here and now by putting up demands such as tax the rich, such as the demands we have over there, in poverty, cut taxes for workers, universal public services, housing for all. I forgot to bring the climate action placard, which is a bit embarrassing, but climate action. And we'll also be building the movement, because when people fight for reforms and win, working people realize that they can change the world. That's the kind of relationship you have to have. You have to always be fighting for things to go in the right direction. That's what I would say on the second question. I can't actually remember the first question now. Sorry.
How would the party act as more than just a pressure group on Labour and the Greens?
Well, worst case scenario is that it would be, and that's not the worst thing. We discussed the radical flank effect at the last workshop I was at Kotari, and how the existence of a radical flank, and this is what I would say to people who are in the Green Party, is that the existence of a radical flank makes people look more moderate. It will make Chloe look like a sensible centre-left politician, which is what she is. She's not a radical. She talks about being radical, but I think she would want to overcome that label, because she's not. She's offering pretty standard stuff, for a centre-left party. So at minimum it would be trying to be the radical flank, pulling everything else to the left. The question of how would it overcome that? I mean, it's simply about numbers. It's simply about how you campaign. I think such a party would aim to be big enough to have an effect at minimum, and then at maximum it would aim to replace the Labour Party. But even if it fails to replace the Labour Party, we still did the best we could, you know? That would be my approach to that question.
Kia ora. I really agree with everything Elliot says, so I don't want to repeat it. But there certainly is a place for that pressure group to the left, and it's only suck it and see, like, keep building, and you don't know till it works through. And there's just that whole series of questions I posed when I spoke before. I'm not sure about your question around the state, because that opens up for me some other questions about the way we make change. I don't see the party is not the only way of making change. It's just one strand of what I think we on the radical left, however we define we, of what we need to do, because we need to also build our own organisations that aren't political parties, that are trade unions, that are social movements, social fighting organisations at grassroots level on different issues, that are different forms of organisations, ideally like cooperatives, workers' cooperatives, and other what some people call prefigurative organisations, that like the Kotare Trust that I work with is one of those, like an autonomous people organisation that we ourselves control in the interests of this kaupapa. That building those kind of organisations can be even more effective than building a political party in some societies, not in ours at the moment, apart from on Māori's side. So I would never say that building a party, an independent left party, is the only answer. And in terms of grappling with questions of the state, it is partly building our own movements as well in our own places. Kia ora.
Okay. So question from Zoom. Sorry, just scrolling up. Okay. So this is from Corey. What are the next steps we need to take to establish this party, and how does an individual get involved in the establishment of this party? So nice and easy question for both of you. I'm going to make sure I'm not answering this one.
The first step is to talk about it and to get people in the same room, and also to talk about the challenges. I think it's really important to talk about the challenges. I haven't been burned by trying to do this kind of thing before, so I think that's where my useful optimism comes in. Those challenges have to be discussed very seriously and taken very seriously. So I think the first step is having a very serious debate about this, see how many people are interested, and then discussions can happen.
Kia ora, Corey. I know you're interested. Corey used to be in Auckland Action Against Poverty back in the day, but he lives in another part of the country now. Great you're here, Corey. The next steps are, like Elliot said, we do have to be a little cautious, match our bravery with caution, and keep thinking and talking. And in a way, meetings like this, and the one that some of us are at, that Michael organised last week, and other discussions that might well be happening inside unions and around the country, I just see this as a big debate that's really hot at the moment among the left. I was in another workshop down on the west coast of the South Island recently where we were talking about the same topic. I think it's a hot topic. Any next steps, I think, will mean bringing the strands of people that are interested in it closer together, but there's no foregone conclusions here. Kia ora.
Thank you for your inspiring talk. I'm very happy to be on the top 100 of the new members of the party that shall be formed. And I'd love to know, I guess we're probably all really keen on doing that. That's probably why we're here. So I was kind of hopeful. I think the thing that I've noticed, because of the Gaza stuff and everything, mainstream media just need to be completely stomped over and like kind of made to be the protection organisation that they are, and that's really gives me hope, actually, that we can kind of create alternative ways of getting ideas out there. and the other hopeful thing is MMP. But my question is actually about the money, and I was just wondering if there's like left-wing organisations like the version of what Atlas is, and that kind of thing, like, because as I watch English politics and I listen to people like Grace Blakely and vulture capitalism, and you know, like, she gets a lot of publicity, and having somebody like her, like who's the equivalent of her in New Zealand, that can, because she's very charismatic and she's young and gorgeous, and you know, like, all those things seem to really be important, obviously. So finding those things, but like aligning with those international movements. And I was just wondering, is there an equivalent of the Atlas, sort of, and because that's been quite a thing, really. And it's been discredited as though it's a made-up thing as well, which is even weirder.
There's quite a few things in that. Firstly, everyone should read Vulture Capitalism by Grace Blakely. Great book. One of the finest discussions of, you know, the fact that the politics is not government versus market, as right-wingers want us to think it is. It's people versus corporations, and the government and the market are like this, actually. You know, Māori can see this because the state is not their state, it's a colonial state. So, you know, it's especially obvious in Aotearoa, but the state is a capitalist institution. Regarding the Atlas Network, we had a really good workshop on this at Kotari recently that I went to, and I think there isn't an equivalent here. There's Ezra, think tank of the left, which puts out some good work. In terms of media outlets, shout out to One of 200. Philip is at the back here. You know, they publish all of my stuff, so I'm very grateful to them. No questions asked. And yeah, that's a really important point that you're alluding to in terms of the need for left-wing research and left-wing writing to be published. That's so important, and we need to build those things as well as a party. I think the question of the party is really important, but also the question of, you know, strengthening existing left-wing outlets, but also creating new ones if necessary. And yeah, there's also people like Max Harris in the audience putting out writings and from a left-wing perspective. So support people who are putting stuff into the mainstream a bit more.
We have a massive gaps on the left here, not just a gap with the party, but a gap with think tanks or other thinking, policy development, the institutions of people's power that serve the people. Those gaps leave us very vulnerable, and it's one of the reasons I think of our side is so weak these days, is because we don't have anything that remotely resembles what I hate to put us in the same boat, but our version of groups like the Taxpayers Union or the New Zealand Initiative. We have nothing. We have no power in that, or very, very little, apart from the things Elliot's mentioned and other gallant efforts by individuals and small groups. The CTU is probably, in fact, one of the biggest institutions. I mean, the unions are, as someone said, our last bulwark, but we are very weak and factionated. And that's why all efforts to build and try to fill these gaps on the left are important in whatever area. Kia ora.
One more question from Zoom.
We had a question before. There were actually a couple of questions in the Zoom that sort of alluded to the same thing of why build another party? Perhaps the long list of failed attempts at this might make us want to pivot organisational models to do not seek representation, but seek to build power beyond the parliamentary system. What should we be learnt from the failures of parties of the left? I think you've sort of alluded to that a little bit already, but if there's anything else want to be commented there, or...
Did you want to say anything?
I mean, I have, in a way, I think both of us have talked about it quite a lot, but very much that we do need to build power in all the unions, groups and networks outside the parliamentary system, and never look to Parliament as a sole place of power or the sole place to build. It's a matter of both, not one or the other. But what it comes down to for me with building party, at least a mass-based party, with the intention of possibly entering Parliament, is that for many people voting is the strongest expression of making change and contributing to change that they can make. And it's a right that's really valuable. And I think that if you can mobilise the votes of people that is for what we believe in, whoever we are, that we can't underestimate the potential power of that, and it's dangerous to say, okay, we're just going to fight on the streets, or we're just going to mobilise coalitions. That doesn't necessarily lead us into taking power, which is ultimately what working people and all of us need to do. It's about actually confronting that and saying, actually not being afraid that part of taking power is taking power in Parliament as well as in other places.
I think that if the radical left ignores Parliament, the far right will love that. They will not be ignoring Parliament. To go back to France, which is not a one-to-one analogy, but in the lead up to the 2017 French election, fascist Marine Le Pen was leading in the polls with young voters, which is disgusting and terrifying. But once Jean-Luc Mélenchon started to cut through with his radical left message, a flawed candidate in many ways, but still clearly on the radical left, suddenly those young voters started to vote for Mélenchon instead, and he ended up winning with young voters. And I think there's a lot of people looking for an anti-establishment alternative, and unfortunately it is the case that there are people who, if they don't see it from the left, will turn to the right instead. We saw this in America with these people who would vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary but then vote for Donald Trump in the general election. I don't understand why you would vote for Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen, but it is a reality that there has to be an electoral alternative, and that elections can give us a huge platform to put out our ideas. Again, once these electoral candidates such as Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, other examples, put their ideas out there to the public, it turned out that they were really popular and they got loads of votes, and that made people realise that there is hope for change because so many people agree. And I think that's fed back into the extra parliamentary movements. There's a lot of union agitation that's going on in the US and the UK now that comes from people who were radicalised by Corbyn and Sanders, and now they've gone back into the unions. I think that kind of thing could happen here, and that's why I believe that elections are definitely not the beginning or the end, but they are important. That's my thoughts on that question. That's my final statement. Other than that is thank you everyone for coming. As I kept saying, getting people in the same room is where it starts, and we've got a lot of people, so thank you, everyone. Do you have anything to say, Sue?
Kia ora. I feel like I've said far too much already. But thank you very much to everyone for being here and for the many supportive questions and comments that have been made. It gives me great heart that so many people are interested and supportive in this question. And let's see where it goes. Kia ora whānau.
Okay, so just one last thing we'd like to plug is we have an upcoming rally. So if you see the poster here, it's the Stop the Sanctions, Stop the Cuts. It is a response to the disgraceful benefit cuts that are being, the disgraceful benefit cuts, the benefit sanctions the cuts on disability allowances that are being done by the current government. So we're going to be rallying against it on the 31st of August. If you go to our Facebook page at System Change Aotearoa, you'll be able to find the event there. There'll be more information. It's also on all your leaflets. So yeah, make sure to come along. Okay, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming.